There's something universal about the feeling of childhood. You see movies from various countries and various times, from big blockbusters to little intimate portraits. There's all these kind of different ways into childhood and what growing up is like.
I love watching coming-of-age films because I can exhibit the same childlike wonder and remind myself that I still have growing up to do.
Annie is like the quintessential plucky young heroine. The word plucky is just the most apt for her because if she wants to break out of the orphanage, she's gonna do it. If she wants to convince Daddy Warbucks to keep her, she's gonna do it.
Often when we look at a film like Annie, we just think it's a musical and that's it. But really, it's an adventure story, and you wanted to be on those adventures with her.
Annie was based on a comic strip from 1924, which was then based on an 1885 poem, which had a musical in 1977, and finally a film in 1982. So that meant in 1982 you had almost a century of Annie.
She was designed as a kind of a Shirley Temple version of a comic book character for Depression-era newspaper readers, to just give them a little bit of light and, you know, talk funny around society swells.
Annie is just the embodiment of the perfect child to adopt. She has a lot of innocence and love for everyone, and that's all she wants in this world, is just someone to love her back.
The favorite villain of many children of the 80s and 90s watching this on repeat is, of course, the great Carol Burnett's Miss Hannigan. She's incredibly memorable in her costume design, and it looks like she's also magpied a few of the better things that the kids have brought in when they've been turned over to the orphanage.
Some of the best stuff in Annie is definitely the relationship between Annie and Miss Hannigan. Miss Hannigan's just kind of a drunk, exploitative, and Annie is just somebody who realizes the various weaknesses in her and uses them to her advantage.
This was a really difficult film to cast. They went through 8,000 auditions for the role of Annie. And Aileen Quinn, who eventually got the role, had to audition 7 times before she was actually confirmed. Which is a lot for a kid.
When she sings "The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow," you wanted to believe that as a child, you could help change the world through song.
The thing to know about Annie is that it's billed as a coming-of-age movie, but it's really about a kind-hearted orphan who forces everyone else to come of age and be better people. So the real evolution isn't Annie. Annie is a straight line, and so we get to watch Albert Finney as Daddy Warbucks finally become a human being. That's the coming-of-age that matters.
This movie is introduced by saying that this is a modern fairy tale, which is less simple and with lawyers. And I think that that really gets across the kind of 90s vibe of this film, including the main character breaking the fourth wall and talking to the audience.
Did you know it's estimated by the year 2000, 1 out of every 3 people will be a member of my family?
Big Girls Don't Cry, They Get Even is kind of like a crazier version of the Brady Bunch. It's really about this family that's made up of assorted stepmom, stepdad, step-siblings, and Laura is the main character, and she is a middle child. And being a middle child is hard. You don't get as much attention as the other kids, and you kind of feel left out, and Laura feels very passionately about leaving this family behind, so she just decides to sort of get out of Dodge.
"She won't get far, she's just a girl" is a line uttered by the cruel stepfather character, and it really kind of paints a picture of the sort of tension that Laura is up against.
This family is forced to come together and actually live under the same roof while they search for her. And in doing so, they learn to get along and live with one another in ways that they couldn't before, in ways that were really affecting Laura.
I also like that Big Girls Don't Cry has this vibe of examining other kinds of families and how they are actually weirder. You see the main character make fun of a girl in her class who's pretending that her blended family is great. She obviously tries hanging out with like a creepy religious family that's all about goodness. So you see through all these other kind of Threeves Bears scenarios that her family is actually what fits her.
Joan Micklin Silver hadn't made a movie in a while when this kind of landed on her lap. And it kind of feels like one of her movies. And how it does that is that she has such an incredible eye for talent and ensemble dynamics.
What'd you say?
Talking about a sense of
Well, I wasn't talking to you.
Well, I am talking to you.
David, just drop it.
Big Girls Don't Cry, They Get Even really is a proto-Clueless and a proto-Slums of Beverly Hills. If you sort of mix the two of them together, that's what you're gonna get here. So people wanted a movie like this. They just weren't ready for it quite yet.
Crooklyn captures the feeling of summer as a child so well, of just the laziness that comes with not knowing what day it is, the breeziness that comes with not having a schedule.
Crooklyn is a very interesting autobiography, partially because Spike Lee turns to the memories of his family, including his brother Cinque and his sister Joie Lee, to really fill out kind of a fulsome look at a time in their lives.
Most directors, when they make this period piece autobiography type thing, usually put themselves at the center. But here, Lee's stand-in is way off to the side. I think he's like one of the younger siblings. So the focus really is on Troy and her experiences of girlhood. And a lot of that is informed by Spike Lee's sister, who co-wrote the film with him.
Troy is a 9-year-old girl and she's living with her 4 brothers. The house is chaotic. There's a lot of laughter. There's a lot of fighting. And she really wants to grow up fast. But I don't think she really knows that her childhood is just this moment in time. And when you grow up, it's gone. She'll soon learn that, though, when her mother passes away.
The scene where Troy tells her father that she doesn't want to go to her mother's funeral is so heartbreaking. It's a beautiful moment from the direction of Spike Lee.
I hate funerals. I'm not going.
Troy, you're not the only one who's in pain. We're all hurting.
Troy steps up and fulfills her mother's last wishes. She looks after her brothers, and she realizes, I think, that she's actually grown up. It's a really bittersweet but lovely film about a girl realizing her power and the love of her family.
The Devil's Backbone was Guillermo del Toro's 3rd film and 2nd Spanish-language film. In between Cronos and The Devil's Backbone, he did Mimic, which was his first American studio film. And the experience was so bad that he did this Mexican-Spanish co-production next.
I remember this as the movie that announced Guillermo del Toro as this more kind of mature filmmaker. Like, here's a guy that's kind of wearing themes of history and trauma on his sleeves within genre film. And this is a movie about Francoist Spain, and it's using the perspective of children to process that trauma and to process the idea of coming of age within this kind of brutal history. And it tells it as a ghost story.
I've always admired how giving The Devil's Backbone is to its audience. We have Guillermo del Toro here, not really flinching. We know that this is a ghost story. In the opening credits, we see an accidental murder of a child, and a few moments later, we see his ghost. He's not withholding. He shows us exactly what he's going to do with this film, and it's truly magical.
The film was shot in Madrid, and it concerns this orphanage where you've got some lovely, heartwarming children dealing with a ghost they know as Santi. Once the kids realize what actually happened to Santi, they team up with him against a common enemy, which I think is a really unique idea.
In the orphanage, they all kind of agree to work together to keep each other safe, but Jacinto reveals and acts upon his desire to become independently rich, and he murders for it.
This is Guillermo del Toro at his most unrestrained emotionally. It really drives home the point that in war times, innocent people are killed. Bodies pile up, and that's just how it is. It's bleak, but this film also has a great big beating heart.
E.T. is so beloved because of the childlike wonder it brings to every single frame. Just like the amount of power that Steven Spielberg gives to his child characters. That moment where they're biking and they're about to encounter the police force and the bikes just lift out of the air, my heart lifts every single time. Like, it's just such a magical moment in cinema.
This is one of those foundational movies that is part of every kid's coming of age in a way. Like, we're discovering the magic of movies through this movie.
This is a movie that treats kids with the respect that they deserve. It's a movie that allows them to be the heroes in their own story, but it also lets them have fun and lets them say things like penis breath.
There's nothing like that, penis breath! Elliot! Sit down.
Which is part of the Melissa Matheson script that I think is just brilliant because it feels like how kids would actually talk.
E.T. is also fun because you actually have 3 kids at its core. Elliot shares this psychic link with E.T., but you also have Mike, his brother, who kind of can do anything, and he's sort of the biking guy trying to get into trouble, and then Gertie, who sort of tells it like it is, but also teaches E.T. to talk. And I just love the idea that E.T. is an adult scientist who is kind of relying on these 3 weird kids to get home.
The genesis of E.T. is from Spielberg's own childhood. His parents were divorcing, he needed an older brother but didn't have one, and he really thought of E.T. as a creature that could have helped him during this time.
The story went through a lot of different treatments. For a while it was actually called Night Skies, and it was a lot scarier. But eventually they got to the idea that E.T. was going to be a friendly alien, and he was going to develop a really close bond with Elliot, the main character, who in this case is sort of a stand-in for Steven Spielberg himself.
I mean, E.T. is very easy to make fun of, but it touches certain nerves in everybody. People watching E.T., whether they know it consciously or not, when E.T. is leaving, that's about letting your kid go off to their life, or that's accepting the death of a parent, it's accepting the loss of something. Despite being a special effects movie and a sci-fi movie, in terms of coming-of-age feelings and emotions, it's scrupulously realistic.
You know, Fanny and Alexander is very, very good at showing you what a charmed existence for a child would look like. The charmed existence of having this big, noisy family all around you, of having this beautiful house, and all that is perfectly set up for the moment when that's all taken away from them.
Fanny and Alexander approaches like growing up, coming of age in a mythic sense. It's like thinking of your memories and they grow to this very grandiose version of it, like slow, big, important.
Bergman also taps into that fear of seeing your mother marry the wrong person and having no power to stop that.
Fanny and Alexander is very autobiographical when it comes to Bergman. He really is imparting his own life onto the lens of Alexander.
It's somewhat novelistic in the way that it's conceived, but it's purely cinematic in the way that it's executed. There's little magic realist touches around the edges, but that's very in keeping with the perspective of childhood.
Alexander has this really incredible imagination. He sees statues moving and ghosts because he's struggling so much to adapt to this new family, the loss of his father, and he's seeking something that he can grab onto.
Ingmar Bergman said that he felt it was very important to acknowledge the privilege of his childhood. In spite of the fact that there is a fairly dark story here, he wanted people to know that, you know, it started comfortable and it ended comfortable. It's just kind of a moment in his life.
The vast majority of films that Ingmar Bergman is known for, Persona, Through a Glass Darkly, are very spare, small cast, black and white. All of his great films of the 1960s are very much about adults. But Fanny and Alexander is really quite the opposite. It's full of lush color and opulent production design. You get the feeling that for Bergman, adult life was smaller and lonelier and full of just, winnowing options, whereas childhood is this magical place of great splendor where even the darkest of circumstances can see you through.
I
actually think the lesson of Fanny Alexander is that great line of the movie where they say, there's no shame in taking pleasure in life. Let's, in this brief moment while we're alive, enjoy it. And I think that that is something that sort of kids innately understand. And I think if you can come full circle around to that idea of remembering what it's like to just take pleasure in things, I think that's kind of the secret to life.
George Washington was released in the year 2000, and I think it's a new look at childhood for a new millennium.
We're so used to seeing films like Stand By Me, where you have a group of kids who they have that one summer where they know life's about to change and it's essentially this kind of grand adventure. But in George Washington, it's shown from the perspective of children who are living in a world of poverty.
A lot of the scenes feel like we're just a fly on the wall watching these varied characters in this kind of rural, rundown North Carolina town. You really get the sense throughout George Washington that the characters have nothing to do but just hang out, talk, and burn time.
Sometimes it's realistic, sometimes it's very poetic, but at the same time, it feels just like the way kids talk.
Did she love me?
Not as much as she loved me.
Why not?
'Cause you couldn't do the funny dance.
I can too.
The film captures a world that feels almost outside of time, a place where industry has died and nature has taken over. There's even a scene in which you see a tree growing in the middle of a school gymnasium. There is drama in the film, but George Washington is definitely not about plot. Rather, it's a travelogue through a dream of childhood.
George Washington also has this very dark core where you see how a really typical day can turn tragic. An incident happens and everyone is implicated here, and a lot of them are black and they're much more afraid of incarceration.
You could say that George Washington is a rural spin on something like Larry Clark's Kids, but I think that does a disservice to it. George Washington is so incredibly unique and engages with this little group of friends dealing with real tragedy in their lives. I think we were all surprised in 2011 when Martin Scorsese, the director of Mean Streets and Taxi Driver, decided to make a kids' film.
It's really funny for a guy who has spent his entire career talking about how the heart and history of America is built on toxicity. And he's like, but actually 180, the history of cinema is built on magic and wonder and delight. And here's a film to show that.
Hugo is all about the invention of cinema as we know it, and seeing that invention through the lens of a childlike wonder.
Hugo is centered around an orphan who is working at a clock tower, and he is trying to reconnect with his father. As much as Hugo kind of is a very sprawling work, it is very much an intimate tale about family, longing, and loneliness.
When he tries to get to the bottom of this mystery regarding the automaton that his father gave him, he finds this girl who also hangs around at the train station and possesses the key to this automaton that actually unlocks it. And he finds himself in contact with a film historian and then eventually Georges Méliès himself. So this film is not only Martin Scorsese's love letter to cinema, but also to finding yourself and what it means to find connection through cinema.
Georges Méliès is a real figure in history. He's considered the father of special effects in cinema. He understood the power of illusion. He understood that when you put that all together with performance, you can really light up someone's imagination.
We have a scene with Michael Stuhlbarg playing this professor who recounts Méliès' story. He's telling a story about how he as a child got to go to Star Film Studios and see Méliès direct films. The sequence is so wondrous, so beautiful, and so Martin Scorsese.
Hugo is also this melting pot of things that Scorsese might have loved as a kid, whether it's silent comedies, sort of physical comedy of the 30s and 40s, or even 3D. All these things are kind of molded together in sort of the ultimate kids movie.
Ozu's I Was Born But is maybe the loudest silent film of all time.
You don't need sound. Sure, you can have a little track, but this is so visually told through not only Ozu's direction and framing and composition and the story, but it's so amazingly told through these children. He is able to cast boys who are not really acting, they just are.
I Was Born But understands the selfishness that comes with being a child, and a child who thinks that they know what's best for themselves when they actually don't.
It understands that innocence is not a pure state. There's all these movies that are so pious about childhood innocence, that children are these perfect little beings, and anyone who's had a child or been a child knows that that's complete crap.
The two boys in that movie have spent so much time idolizing their dad. And then when they sneak away from school one day and see what he's actually like at work, when they see that he's not as high up in work as they think he is, when they see that he's a little bit of a toady to his boss, they lose respect for him.
The sons are destroyed by this shattering of an alpha father figure, and they rebel against him because they can't respect him.
There's something really remarkable about I Was Born But in recognizing that moment in your life where you perceive class, where you perceive the disparity of wealth between individuals, and the way the movie juxtaposes both the hierarchies that the children experience within their community, how it juxtaposes it with the fact that his father is someone who works for a boss, and the boss is a nicer home. These are really, really interesting human observations that make it one of the all-time great coming-of-age movies.
Watching Jumanji as a kid made me want to escape my life for something dangerous.
It is big stakes, big sets, big action sequences. But what the movie does really deftly is pair that with consequences.
Like specifically the scene where there's a flower that like comes out of a bookcase. I remember as a kid constantly thinking that a flower was gonna come out of my bookcase. That's how realistic Jumanji was to me as a kid.
It's got so many good gags. You feel like you're playing the game when you're watching it. Every time they roll the dice, you're like, oh no, what's gonna happen next?
Jumanji is a strange one because everybody loves it, but it's an absolute horror film.
It is throwing real danger at kids. It is throwing things that can kill you and asking kids to kind of face their fears and find strength in working together rather than facing them alone.
One of my favorite roles for Robin Williams is when he plays a grown-up kid. I think that is something that is exploited in Jumanji.
It is crazy, you know, he went into the board game as a child and he came back, 30 years later, battle-scarred, half kid, half adult.
Alan Parrish is a tragic figure, so it's really cool to see him collaborate with these other kids to try to solve this crisis that they've created in unleashing the world of Jumanji onto the world.
This film really has a potent metaphor at its core, which is the idea of growing up as sort of a wilderness that one needs to move their way through. The two main characters have just lost their parents, and the idea of that feeling like a jungle, like something full of predators and full of fear, is a really interesting way to make two young characters grow up really fast.
There are not a lot of truly great films about the inexorable cruelty of life that are somehow dear to me, but Kes is.
Kes is a deeply upsetting, poetic, wonderful film that everyone should watch at least once.
It's so striking and unusual, especially given where the film is set, to see this boy with this sort of magnificent bird that keeps, coming to him.
Kes is a very interesting movie because it is realistically depicting just a different time and a different way of life for children. Kids who had jobs, who were stuck in these overwhelming systems and seemed on the track to just, do something they didn't want to do.
Set in northern England in the late 1960s, Kes takes place in a village where green space and industry are pressed right up against each other.
It's a mining town where there aren't really many prospects, even for the people who do have jobs. And the protagonist of the film is a 15-year-old who's not too thrilled with his present
But when he's out in the woods, his existence seems almost idyllic. So it's no accident that it's in the woods that he first discovers his kestrel.
Kes documents corporal punishment in a very graphic way. The tears of the last little boy who the schoolmaster canes were real.
I hope it's going to be a lesson to you. I don't suppose for 1 minute it will be. I don't doubt before the end of the week you'll be back in here again for exactly the same crime, smoking.
This film is unrelenting in its bleakness. It grinds away at Billy. In fact, I don't think there is a supportive or loving word of encouragement until the scene in the English class where he's asked to speak on a story. He talks about finding Kes, about how he trained him, and you see the young actor come alive in this moment, and you get the sense that there's actually still this spark of life in him.
When I got in about 70 yards from her in middle of the field, I called her. Kes, come on, Kes. Come on, then.
It's absolutely wrenching, honest, true, and powerful, and that's why it endures.
It's super traumatic to like move to a new place, but it's extra traumatic when you move to a new place, you don't know anybody, it's the murder capital of the world, and your brother suddenly becomes a vampire.
He's sleeping in, he's changed his clothes, he's changed who he hangs out with. He's basically been shot with a vampire venom, but it's kind of a puberty.
The vampires themselves and the vampire mythology presented in this film are pretty classical. And so you've got that pitted against this kind of neo-modern thing where the vampire teenagers have a very particular Romani aesthetic. Insofar as it's unmistakably 80s, it also kind of exists out of time.
I think part of the real success and love of this movie is because of the way that it was filmed. Everybody in the movie is like starring in a rock video, right? It's the way that it's shot.
Sam from The Lost Boys is a truly relatable protagonist. He's also a bisexual icon, judging by the posters in his room. He's got Molly Ringwald, he's got Rob Lowe, I relate, but also he's a fashion icon. And I love that this character is thrown into this world that's sort of dark and dank, and he maintains his personality.
The Lost Boys really delivers two completely different versions. In one version, you have Michael being brought into this world of a vampire biker gang, and it's all about Kiefer Sutherland being blonde, wearing leather jackets. But then the other side of it is you have Corey Haim being brought in as this preteen character and the Frog Brothers, and they're all figuring out what vampires are and that they might be a threat. You could have watched this movie at age 12 and it feels like something you shouldn't be watching at 12. But I think as an adult, you can also really appreciate just how fun it is.
My Girl is a coming-of-age film. I think the most important thing that it lets viewers know is that you will die. You could die at any time.
And if not you, your friend.
Yeah.
I can't think of anyone from my generation that didn't see My Girl, wasn't traumatized by My Girl, and doesn't talk about it without like this, oh yeah, I cried a lot in that movie.
It talks about death, it talks about friendship, it talks about becoming a woman, love, family, like it does so much.
The 90s has a lot of films that are teaching kids about mortality, about the ending of things, but very, very few of them have as much heart, as much comedy, and really as much star power behind it as My Girl does.
I think the best part of this movie is the chemistry between Anna Shlumsky and Macaulay Culkin. The two of them feel like they would be real friends.
Let's go to the church. They're playing bingo tonight. I told you I'd get in trouble. Pacifist. I'm not. Bedwetter. I stopped that.
I think one thing My Girl deals with very well is just anxiety in childhood. You see in Veda all these sort of different worries about death and dying and disease, but at the same time, you see the ways adults try to comfort her and try to work through it and what works and doesn't work, and I think it's pretty instructive in that way.
It's interesting that her mother passed away when she's quite little, but it also brings that fear that she mentions in the poetry class, that she's responsible for killing her mother, and then seeing her best friend die as well, and it just kind of piles on these really heavy and intense levels of grief. It feels really unfair for an 11-and-a-half-year-old to have to go through such a painful experience that many of us won't have to confront until we're much older and we have a lot more emotional maturity. But I think that's where the beauty of My Girl comes in.
Night of the Hunter is so strange and is such a perfect film of kind of childhood nightmare logic. You have sort of the frustrations of, I know something, but none of the adults believe me, and that kind of claustrophobia.
When you're a child, people will take the word of any adult over you. And the Robert Mitchum character is literally trying to kill them, and nobody will believe them except the Lillian Gish character.
Night of the Hunter opens with all of these children's heads floating in space. It sort of immediately pulls us out of the real world into this realm of fantasy and play that will continue to undergird even the darkest moments in the rest of the film.
Basically, Robert Mitchum terrorizes these two poor children as they uncover the horrible truth of what his intentions are for their poor, innocent, oblivious mother. He claims to be a preacher who loves the power of the battle of love and evil, but is actually a widow-making murderer who goes on serial killings of women who are looking for a new husband.
There has really never been a heavy more menacing than Robert Mitchum's self-styled preacher. He's wearing what is very typical of the 19th century Old West itinerant preacher's clothing. What's so fascinating about this is that when he's standing under a street lamp, the silhouette of the hat and the shadows that it casts, he becomes this prototypical, all-powerful evil monster by virtue of the way he's designed and dressed.
The film was photographed by the great Stanley Cortez. It's very reminiscent of silent film expressionism and also classic horror films, and its imagery is rife with shadows. It possesses a singular kind of spectral beauty.
Some standout scenes for me include the children's mother is depicted strapped to a car at the bottom of the lake, and she's just drifting there. It's a horribly arresting, silent scene. You'll never forget it.
It's not a movie that has a lot of time for coming of age in the traditional sense. It's more about children who have just been thrown into the absolute terror, the absolute life or death stakes of adulthood.
The world that Charles Laughton created is utterly unique and unrelentingly not normal.
In The Outsiders, the boys in this movie are growing up way too fast, and you cannot escape growing pains when that happens.
The boys in The Outsiders, the greasers, they have to come to terms with some really tough things. They have to deal with the death of their parents, going to jail. They have no tether. They don't have any adults to really take care of them.
The greasers are dealing with real problems. And I think the story from Ponyboy's perspective is really, how do you hold on to a sense of worth in a circumstance like that?
There's a real purity of emotion that Coppola finds in all of the artifice and 80s schmaltz. It's so swoony and romantically filmed that it might as well be a musical.
The Outsiders, the novel, was really remarkable when it was published because S.E. Hinton wrote and published this when she was still in high school, and it was pulling a lot of inspiration from the kids around her. And so it was this really honest and truthful record of what it was like to be socially, economically disadvantaged in Oklahoma in the 1960s. I think adapting that story 15 years later comes with an inherent challenge, but I think that where the movie really sells this is in the casting. There's kind of the joke of Grease-style casting, where you have teenagers being played by people who look like they're 40, and that's kind of the opposite of what you see here, where C. Thomas Howell, who plays the lead, he was 16 in this movie. So you really have the authenticity of seeing characters who are meant to be young, and they look young.
I won't be able to walk again.
Not even on crutches. Doc says I busted my back.
You're gonna be fine.
Francis Ford Coppola kind of pats himself on the back, saying, like, I was the one who found these rising actors. And as boastful as that is, he is kind of correct. You've got people like Patrick Swayze and Matt Dillon and Tom Cruise, Rob Lowe, Emilio Estevez, Ralph Macchio. Like, they all go on to have these incredible careers.
You could say that this is Francis Ford Coppola kind of making a studio picture for hire, but I think his sensibilities are there. This is a very sweeping epic. We have so many characters thrown at us, but they're all so memorable, just like in The Godfather.
This movie is deeply gross. If you have any sort of squeam about flesh or meat, like if Cronenberg is on your I can't do it list, this I think actually takes it even further because there's an edible nature to this.
I don't know who it was even made for. On the front of it, it's like your standard, there's something malevolent going on with my parents, and yet at the same time, it's maybe not intense or is extreme enough, like a conventional horror movie. It really does thread that needle, and is just very deeply strange, in, I think, a compelling way.
There's a lot of trauma around the dinner table in childhood, being forced to eat food that you don't want, and Parents really takes that metaphor to an extreme.
The protagonist of this movie, Michael, is just a little boy that has lived sort of a charmed life with his perfect parents, or seemingly perfect parents, but underneath it all, as Michael learns, they kill people or they take dead bodies that already exist and they eat them. That's the meat. Michael goes into the pantry at one point in the film to spy on his mom and look through the slats in the door. And as he's doing that and getting more and more anxious, this sausage comes down from an upper shelf and starts to wrap around him. And because this movie is so crazy, you're like, maybe this is actually happening. It's not, but it's a good representation of how guilty he feels spying on his parents, because you're not supposed to think that your parents are bad, right?
I think Bob Balaban's Parents is about what happens when you walk in on your parents having sex. This sort of happens in a way in Parents, although of course our main character discovers his parents are cannibals. But it really is a metaphor for that awkward moment where you discover your parents are sexual beings. Queen of Causeway is a coming-of-age story that's also a biopic and a sports drama. But it's so passionately told and uplifting that it avoids cliches entirely. Queen of Katwe was based on an ESPN article that was published in 2012 about Fiona Matusi, a real-life grandmaster. You get a sense that Disney was taking a big swing. They had never set a live-action film entirely in Africa before, but this film is stunning. We're getting this very insider view of Kampala in Uganda.
This is not a, you've got to win this one chess match and you'll have the money and whatever. It is much more about how people from poverty interact with other classes and whether this system is just kind of completely set against kids who are born there.
A moment in Queen of Katwe that really stands out to me is the moment where all of the kids from the slum go to the fancy school. Despite being provided beds and bedding for the night, their coach comes in and finds that they're all sleeping together in a big pile on the floor because that's just how they grew up and what they're used to doing.
The Queen of Katwe shows that when you really put your heart into something, it can open doors that you never imagined. One of the things that we see with Fiona is the better she gets at chess, the more trophies she begins to win. It exposes her to a greater world. She gets to go to Russia. She gets to go to Sudan. As a biopic, Queen of Katwe is underappreciated, but also I think it speaks to the way something like chess can bring people together, can lift up. I think we often think if you don't have money, then you're not part of a particular society. But in this case, all you need is a chessboard and some chess pieces, and you can change the fate of an entire community.
As a child of divorce, I never really saw any movies that talked to me about divorce as I understood it, in that I have no idea what's going on and no one will treat me like an adult. And I have never seen a movie explain that better than Rich Kids.
Rich Kids is a time capsule of the Upper West Side in Manhattan. These are kids that are quite wealthy, and we get to see them navigate their parents' worlds as those worlds are crumbling.
It's a very interesting approach how they don't really vilify the parents. There's obviously things that are missing in terms of their parenting, but it's not black and white, it's not cut and dry.
This movie plays on the usual kind of comic inversion where, you know, kids are like adults and adults are like kids.
You don't have to say Daddy's working late when he's not even coming home for dinner. And you don't have to wake me up in the morning when you're not even sleeping in our house.
I really love the one dad's corny bachelor pad. It looks exactly like what a kid would want an apartment to be. And at the same time, the kids, they enjoy it, but they're much more concerned with like, you know, rating your dad's girlfriend and stuff like that.
Franny and Jamie are so earnest, they're so beautifully written, and they're innocent. They are pubescent, but they don't really understand sexuality. When they lay in bed together, there's not really a threat. When they take a bath together, however, and all of the parents burst in, you get why all of the hijinks ensue.
Throughout this movie, you really see how these kids value and emulate their parents for better and for worse. They're just learning how to be themselves, and the best templates they have are really delightfully imperfect.
I mean, Spirited Away is just a better version of Alice in Wonderland. We follow a girl who is tough, who is curious, who is adventurous, and who has some issues with her parents. I mean, the parents who turn into pigs, is that because she's in this real majestic, magical world and they literally turn into pigs? Or is this how that she sees her parents?
The world of Spirited Away is full of these reminders that nothing is quite what you or Chihiro are used to. It's familiar faces and concepts in bodies that are distorted, monstrous, or inscrutable.
Spirited Away is a movie I'm always so struck by in terms of imagination. With the creatures, the world, but even just something like the attention to food. It feels so lived in, so material.
A lot of this film is about the fear of the unknown that really comes when you're crossing that bridge from childhood to adulthood. And that's really well exemplified in the character of No Face, who is very much that idea of loneliness, of fear, of the unknown, and the more you feed it, the bigger and scarier it gets.
By the end, she ends up saving her parents, the people who are meant to take care of her. And I think it feels incredibly empowering for this young girl to actually take matters into her own hands and find strength.
It has just one of the most indelible images I can think of in any child's movie, which is of this small girl and this gigantic, emotionless, sort of inscrutable ghost, and they're riding it as if it's just a form of, being a commuter. It's almost the most banal, everyday transport from one plane of reality to another. And again, that's why Miyazaki is so good. He puts strange things in the plainest terms, and that's how they tend to live in the imagination.
I've thought a lot about why To Kill a Mockingbird stands the test of time, why it appeals to every generation, why we can't stop watching it. And I think it comes down to one simple idea, which is that Atticus tells the truth to his children.
When the American Film Institute made their list of cinema's greatest heroes, you had Indiana Jones, you had James Bond, but at number 1, you had Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird.
To Kill a Mockingbird is the story of Scout, who is growing up in Depression-era Alabama in the 1930s with her brother Jem and her father, Atticus Finch, who is a lawyer currently defending a black man for the unjust rape of a woman.
I think this story comes from a real place of authenticity and just based on some of Harper Lee's own memories of growing up in the Deep South at this time. And so I think you really see that realism and that understanding. It kind of makes the movie all the more tragic.
This story is also a very interesting kid's perspective because obviously there's something, gravely evil going on around them. But for the most part, you're actually just seeing kids goofing around and not totally understanding what they're stumbling into. And that's just the reality of childhood, and often looking back on childhood and realizing what the big actual story was.
Obviously, everybody remembers Scout. Everybody remembers Mary Badham's performance as this little girl who is spirited and true of heart, pure of heart, and finds herself watching her father do literally everything he can to save a man's life, but not understanding why her father, who is her hero, can't just snap his fingers and make it happen.
Atticus, I was just saying to Mr. Cunningham that entailments were bad, but not to worry. Takes a long time sometimes.
Atticus never rages against injustice or unfairness. He's calm, he goes through the process, he understands it, and he tries to teach his kids about it. But the fact that he never lets his emotions get the better of him makes him kind of this stalwart guardian we all wish we had and we all wish we were for other people.
You got to look at Uncle Buck as the coming-of-age answer to this trend in movies of the late 80s and early 90s, where it's like, this person who appears unfit for the job was actually the perfect person for the job. You got John Candy being this dominant figure who just kind of charges into a home, seemingly incapable of handling 3 wild children, and yet he ends up becoming the right man for the job.
He is so fun-loving just for himself, but he wants to also give this to the kids. And it's just a wonderful thing to see with an adult.
He is a lovable character, but also kind of irresponsible character as well. And throughout the film, he learns how to be a good father and a responsible person.
The 20 questions scene is, I think, such an iconic bit. Maybe one of the funniest riffs between two actors since, I don't know, Clifford.
What do you do for a living?
Lots of things.
Where's your office?
I don't have one.
How come?
I don't need one.
Where's your wife?
Don't have one.
Macaulay Culkin's character interrogating this uncle who he didn't even know existed with these very adult-like questions cracks me up every time. You really get a sense that this is how children wonder about the adult world, but more so you get a sense that Uncle Buck is very unaccustomed to being around kids.
The emotional and comedic core of Uncle Buck has to be John Candy. He's able to demonstrate his comedic timing, but he's also able to show his dramatic chops as well. He can really pull you in. He's got charisma. I think a lot about that scene between Tia and Uncle Buck, for me, is just John Candy showing that he's a movie star.
Everything you said would happen happened.
I don't want to talk about it. I just want to get you home.
As always with John Hughes and John Candy, I think that there's a real kind of deep river of emotions here. With Buck, you're seeing a guy who is struggling to settle down, but when he's confronted with his brother's kids, and especially realizes how much he's been cut out of their lives because nobody takes him seriously, you can tell that he's really hurt.
He grows and the children grow. Such an incredibly affable figure who takes the moments to really protect the people that he loves when it comes down to it, and he's willing to make the tough calls that a parent needs to make.
Valerie and Her Week of Wonders is a totally gauzy, wild, and fantastic movie, part of the Czech New Wave, which was a real rejection of realism. Here, you're kind of sacrificing a story that makes total sense for one that makes kind of stomach-turning emotional sense.
It follows Valerie, a beautiful 13-year-old girl living in a small village with her grandmother, who one day gets her period. And this kicks off her Week of Wonders.
It might be hitting us a little bit over the head with the metaphor of drops of blood on this white daisy flower, but this really is what Valerie is about. It's about the perils of girlhood, the threat of men, and yes, it has these supernatural angles, but know that this is really about everyday occurrences.
As this film progresses, it weaves a strange tale of coming-of-age young love with also vampire lore. You have characters who want Valerie physically, and then you also have someone like her grandmother who wants Valerie's youth.
bit of a risk when you go see it with an audience because they either find the horror elements funny or they find the erotic elements out of place. But a lot of that is just sort of the discomfort that comes from a movie that's very unembarrassed to deal with this kind of subject matter.
I think if you can take anything away from Valerie and her Week of Wonders, it's this fear that sex and love becomes completely transactional in a traditional society. You're seeing this wedding at the center, you're seeing these vampires that seem to only care about sex to sustain themselves, and the film seems to hint that there might be a different opportunity outside of that.
When Todd Holland was given the assignment to make a feature-length commercial for Super Mario Bros. 3, he decided to make a real movie. A movie about a broken family that are sort of made whole by video games.
The Wizard is one of those films that is so dated, but in the best way possible. But if you're like a 10-year-old kid at that point, this is the perfect movie for you.
Yes, it's a bit of a commercial for Nintendo, but at the end of the day, that's all kids in my generation talked about. It was our whole life. It was all consuming. You have to understand, this was before the internet.
You can criticize The Wizard all you want, but the fact is that we needed films like this as a kid. Not every film could be E.T. It couldn't be a masterpiece. We needed the kind of dreck that The Wizard is, and that's why we rented it over and over again.
It's this pretty infectious road trip movie about this boy genius who was better than anybody else at Nintendo.
It's a kid's dream come true. The freedom of being on the road, making your own adventures, and meeting weird, strange people, and playing video games and getting paid to play video games.
There's moments throughout the movie that are very playful and campy and unbelievable, but I think there's this really great scene once they get to Vegas that really highlights and underlines what this movie does well, which is Jenny Lewis relaxing next to a pool while Fred Savage trains his friend to be good at every video game while there are child servers walking around with pop. It shows you a world where kids are all that matter.
Extro is a deeply upsetting film.
It's like one of the few films that you can watch it endlessly and constantly be gobsmacked.
There is a very surreal vibe to the film that in some ways it's incredibly off-putting, and in some ways it's incredibly hypnotic.
Look on the internet, look up Alien, and you'll see like this photo of something like bent over, very scary looking. You see it pop up all the time. That is a still from Extro that has somehow gone from being a clear movie effect to becoming a kind of like Sasquatch footage on the World Wide Web.
My Parent is an Alien is a known subgenre of science fiction and horror, but no film has done that the way Extro has.
We have this kid, Tony. His dad gets abducted by aliens. And Tony's kind of left in this limbo. He still thinks his dad's coming back. And his dad actually does come back, but he's been birthed by a grown woman.
You could look at Extro as being like, this is a little boy who is dealing with the loss of his father. And then you see a fully grown woman give birth graphically to a fully grown man, and then the panther shows up. And then it just compounds, and you're like, oh no, this is just wacky.
Eventually, one of the scariest things in Extro is Tony develops these powers to kind of imagine whatever he wants. And Tony's childish impulses combined with these powers create some really evil stuff. Like, for instance, he brings a toy soldier to life to just totally murder the lady downstairs.
There is just such a beautiful DIY quality to it. It's one of those films where the special effects are so incredible, and they mostly involve condoms full of fake blood.
Extro was prosecuted for disobeying British obscenity laws. It was that notorious of a film when it was released on the video market. There is no film like it, and it is deeply depraved.
The Year My Voice Broke is considered a quintessential coming-of-age film for the Australian film industry, which is interesting because I'm like, I know these people and I grew up in rural Alberta.
The Year My Voice Broke was filmed in the southern tablelands of New South Wales, actually not that far from where I grew up myself. Visually, this film is almost exactly how I remember growing up. You know, these bad, demountable school block toilets, washrooms with holes in their walls, the kind of run-down nature of a lot of old historic buildings that are not very well looked after.
What The Year My Voice Broke does really well is show what it's like to live in a small town where everyone knows each other's business and how destructive that is on kids.
There's some pretty nasty rumors going around about Freya and about her mother, and they really dog these characters. It's the kind of setting where what other people think of you is something you cannot control, and yet it dictates so much of your experience.
All the adults in The Year My Voice Broke are very cagey. We get a scene where our lead character is confronting his mother about what she might know about his friend Freya. And you can really see that her body language is tightened. She doesn't want her son to know that the whole town is aware of what happened.
You were asking about this in the pub, weren't you? Why are you so interested? I don't know. I've told you I don't know anything about it.
The Year My Voice Broke is also interesting because it is mostly a story about Freya, and I do think that people often remember stories about other people in their lives more than they're remembering the exact moments of their own lives. So here is a person that so affected a man that he continues to remember her in his adulthood.
Freya kind of breaks your heart, and it especially makes you sad because the last few moments are her promising she will see him again. And he knows in his heart that sometimes people are just there for the moment and they're gonna be gone forever.
Zazie in the Metro is one of the best comedies you've never seen.
You get a kind of elasticity, a Mad Magazine energy to everything this kid is viewing.
I know Louis Malle was never a manic pixie dream girl in Paris. He didn't live that life. But there is something wonderful about watching the entire film encapsulate bubbly hope.
Zazie is this brash and precocious 10-year-old who arrives in Paris for the weekend to spend some time with her uncle.
Whether she's in like a gray skirt or in her blue jeans, she has so much mobility, which is something that's really beautiful to capture on screen.
I think one of the best parts of this movie is just the core idea that all Zazie wants to do when she goes to Paris is ride on the metro, and this metro strike is totally ruining her fun. And I think you can absolutely remember those moments from your childhood where you just had one basic want and you couldn't get it and you couldn't understand why.
There are so many Looney Tunes-esque chase sequences in the movie. My favorite one is Zazie has stolen a pair of blue jeans and she's being chased by this cop. She evades him through Paris using editing tricks, bombs, the whole shebang. Zazie on the Metro is very frenetic, it's haptic, it's quite experimental. It's almost like a live-action cartoon, which seems like a contradiction. But I think nonetheless, it really resonated with audiences because of how fun it is. Zazie on the Metro played once a week in a particular Parisian movie theater for over 20 years. It was a real cult classic, even if many critics didn't like it initially in 1960.
Growth and change are inescapable. It's a sad reality. It's like death and taxes. We're all gonna have to do it one day. I think what movies can do when they tackle that, when they really put that forward, is help you with that discomfort. They help you connect to yourself in a way that you didn't know you could because they show you the whole story and not just the moment you're in.